and welcome to PodRocket, web development podcast brought to you by LogRocket. I'm Noel, and today I'm here with Russ Miles. He's a technical product owner of the internal platform at Clearbank, as the author of 10 books, most of them published by O'Reilly Media, here to talk about how developer platforms fail and how yours won't. How's it going, Russ?
It's going wonderfully.
Let's set some terms first. When we're talking about developer platforms and platform engineering, what are we talking about?
We're talking about primarily delivering a experience to engineering teams where they can produce, if you like, flow of value. And so what you're doing is you're spending a lot of your time asking what is getting in the way of that flow. The way I tend to look at it is that what a platform is there to do is to support a habitat. This is a term that Richard P. Gabriel uses in some of his work. And I love it because it's not a factory. It's not pretending that we are just trying to produce. We're actually trying to create a habitat that supports how people need to work when they're creating software, or creating value through software is a better way of looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
And so because that is an incredibly broad remit, an internal developer platform is often composed of some stalwarts, some things you always expect to see. And then it can be really interesting at the edge cases. It can be fascinating, the things that you try to innovate around. But yeah, the platform is there. And the reason I really like the word platform is that idea of it being lifting something up. You're trying to increase the flow. You're trying to help people do more with their incredible skills, their attention, their lives, really, if you want to get dramatic about it. That's what a platform's supposed to be there to do.
Yeah.
And of course, there's the patterns that come out of team topologies that also amplify and extend these sorts of things and say this is what a platform team is there to produce. One of the things that isn't as obvious, I think, in much of the literature is that it's a product proposition when it's done really well. So you look at all of these different pieces of that experience that are trying to enable this flow, and you're trying to distill a really compelling set of products from it. And you take a product philosophy about how you bring those different capabilities and that innovation to the teams, which again is an area that can really hinder. It can be one of those things that causes these things to fail.
I'm curious where you draw the line on what is more just strictly developer tooling choices for like an internal team versus what is the platform. Because I feel like for some people, there's a slew of make files and that's all you got. And like there's not a ton of like at minimum, when do you think that there is an internal platform? How do you define that? Where is that line in this is just the tool we use versus this is our platform?
It's a really great question because I tend to be very clear in my talks that you've already got a platform. If you're delivering software, if your company is doing that and seeing value from that exercise, then you already have a platform. But what you've got is a platform that will have evolved naturally, possibly in disjointed, multifarious ways. And what you'll be missing is potentially the economies of scale argument that can go with it. You're missing the opportunity to cross-pollinate and learn from how other teams use these things. And so if you've got an incredible cottage industry of everyone doing it their own way, then you miss that opportunity to optimize how people can move from team to team, for example. Onboarding is interesting and innovative for every single team because it's slightly different. So it's kind of a scaling pattern to say that you're moving from a platform that you already have that could be maybe optimal in the pockets. It's not optimal at the large. And frequently I will see that companies get to a certain size when they go, I think we can benefit from a platform as a product now. They don't often say that last bit, unfortunately, but they will say, I think we need a platform now. And then there's me going, you already got one. But yeah, to take a product view on it is basically saying we're going to treat it as a product. We're going to try and make it consistent where that consistency is beneficial to the teams.
Yeah.
And we're going to potentially look at where it should be customized and in different areas. Context is going to be a very important part of the game, but we're going to focus on building it as a set of products. We're going to take a product approach to this piece of the puzzle that we thought was just tools. We thought it was just ways of working. But actually, when we view it as a product set that we can tune to get these bigger benefits from, then we're at that size, we're at that step of maturity where that just makes sense.
I've spent most of my time at smaller companies, smaller firms, wherein it always feels to me like we end up with something that I think one would define as like the developer platform internally, but it feels like there was seldom an intentional decision to go out and build this thing, kind of like you're saying. And it's more as we plot along, someone's like, hey, this is like a thing that's helpful for us. We should like make this part of the tool chain that we use for builds or deploys or whatever it may be. And it has this just like organic thing, and certain pieces of it end up being used by certain subsets of the organization. But maybe I've just been fortunate. And then I've never felt that there's like a ton of strife there. And you mentioned, like you said, we're all on a platform to some extent, but often you're not the one that chose to use the specific tools that end up being this platform. I guess, have you experienced that at all? Or do you think at larger organizations, it ends up just inherently being more prescriptive and organized?
It's a really interesting point you make about the sort of context you work in and what that might mean to whether a platform is even recognized or how it gets tuned. I'm very fortunate in my career, almost from the first day of it, I was working on developer tooling and platforms. Back then, it was nothing glamorous. I should point out, I was working in configuration management was the job I was doing. And that was because it was so painful to get a version of the code on somebody's machine that was accurate and working, that there were people like me who were building systems on top of SCCS and other Unix tools for version control. And then there were these things called, build stacks and things like lots of different ways that code could be managed so that a team could work together on some things. And ever since then, in one way or another, I've been working on how you craft these platforms, where commonality is useful, where difference is important. And from what I've seen, there is these moments where a consistency in one area is good because it's no longer the most innovative area. It's like be different when different is valuable. And that is context sensitive, but in some things it's really obvious. A good example is if you have all of your teams debugging your pipelines. And is that really valuable? Is that really what you want to be encouraging? Or do you want them to be doing something else with their attention and their abilities? And it's then that you might go, okay, some standardization will take some pain away here. There's a phrase that's used a lot in the literature around platform engineering, which I think is important, is that we're there to optimize the cognitive burden on software developers. And it's often misunderstood as we're trying to reduce cognitive load on the developers. And we're not really. It's much more important to think of it as a tuning exercise rather than a complete reduction. And it comes back to something I learned when I was working on the Spring framework, and I was working in Spring Source and Interbase 21 with the teams there. One of the things that was constantly on their minds that I could see was, what are we asking people to hold in their heads? What are they able to do really well? Because we're saying to them, this other thing, you don't need to worry about it so much. And the balancing act of allowing the right thing to be easy, and by easy, we mean low cognitive overhead, and less friction in doing it. Making that really easy, and then making other things that are acceptable in certain contexts possible. And not just possible, but again, probably reasonably low friction, was a balancing act that we bring to platforms. We're not trying to hide away the complexity of platforms so that they become surprising to you. Because you have runtime facets to a platform, build time facets to the platform, and then of course, developer tooling, local development as an experience. Coupling all that together is what we do in platform engineering. Internal developer platform engineering, it's all of that. And what we're constantly asking ourselves, what I'm always asking myself is, are we hiding something that actually increases friction? Or are we taking something away from that moment where the person will want their head in a different space anyway? And the interesting thing, just to share with you, is that the majority of the big gains that I've seen in platform engineering tend to always come back to ways of working. They tend to come back to, how do we make decisions as development teams do we have the cognitive space to do so?
Yeah.
It's thinking about that makes a big difference. There's a lot of emphasis at the moment on AI assisted coding and the vibe coding community and everything else. I find the storm around it interesting because really the question isn't, can we produce code in larger quantities or even faster? It's, can we make good decisions about what we're producing? And that doesn't come back to, can you write code fast? It comes back to usually, where are your feedback loops when you've made a mistake?
Yeah.
And so, about times we've worked with teams where we've gone, your feedback loops are right at the end of everything you've done. They're way over here when you've deployed to production, or they're way over here in staging, or they're way over here in your pipelines. Could we shift that into local dev? Can you see that when you're coding? And I'm not alone in this perspective. One of the people I respect hugely in this industry is Rod Johnson, the creator of the Spring Framework. And the Spring Framework only existed. Apologies to anyone listening who's going, Spring Framework, Spring what? Because if you haven't come from a Java background, you may not have touched it. But what it did was a really simple value proposition that got completely lost to some degree in everything else it could do. The value proposition it did, the thing that I believe from talking to Rod in the past is the reason he created it, is he wanted to do TDD, and doing it in the enterprise flavors of Java at the time was almost impossible.
Yeah.
The feedback cycles were super slow. And so what he said is, can I build the confidence in the code I'm writing right now in front of me that everything else can be slow? It can take time to get to production. It can take time to go through approvals. It can get time to load up into containers and stuff down the line.
Yeah.
But can I get those feedback loops right now that will make me feel I've done it right? And everything down from here is probably just mechanism.
Yeah.
So a lot of the feedback loop tuning, on stage I call these things OODA loops. So design your platform with OODA loops in mind. When I'm doing the training course, I talk about 2 or 3 things: OODA loops, habits. What habits do you want to encourage? Those OODA loops are something you can do that with. It's saying, can we help to establish the confidence and decision-making loops as close to the developer's moment, rather than pushing it out into the periphery where we're waiting and it's coming back later on to ask us to context switch to something else.
Yeah. Like you said, this kind of lack of surprises as things go down the pipeline, and having a good grasp on why something has broken as it has gone through. That does seem like the crux of productivity here. But I'm curious how one balances that, because it almost feels to me the pipeline will be the least surprising if you are familiar with what it's doing, right? Like as a developer, if you're familiar with the internals and what it's trying to do. But I think at that point, then you are in this mode where the entire engineering team, it is part of their cognitive load all the time of what the pipeline itself is doing. They are probably contributing to it or looking into it or debugging it. It feels to me like inherently there'll be the most empathy there if everyone knows what's going on. How do you balance that? We want to abstract this and simplify it so you don't have to know, but when something breaks, it's easy to go in and figure out why whatever you've just done has caused a new problem that wasn't there before.
It's a great question again. So one of the things I do is I use a concept of development time thinking and then operational thinking. Not to say that that's 2 different people, because we're not trying to go back to dev and ops.
You're right.
We're trying to keep that responsibility where the feedback loop is tightest. But something I used to say a lot to folks is shift left sounds great in principle, but if you're shifting left with no help support with the decision-making processes you're shifting left, then what you're doing is not shifting left, you're dumping left. So there is a very real danger that if you don't understand the things that people want their heads to be thinking about at a given moment in time, then you could shift all the concerns at pipelines left with no support and no help, and just say, right now, you've got to think about all this.
Yeah.
Because you're now one way of thinking of this is you're now in an arms race with the pipeline.
Right. Yeah.
And that doesn't help, right? That doesn't help with things. So what I tend to do is very closely ask and interact with, and we use the DX tool as well to survey this and get numbers on it as well. I try to get as close to the lived developer experience as possible, and then begin to solve what is in their head when they're trying to do the work they're doing. And yes, I will shift left. We will bring things, and we'll bring that awareness of what the pipeline is looking for, because the pipeline is just a mechanism. It is just a technical choice that we feel the best place to surface certain things happens after you finish developing. I love that as a question, by the way.
Mhm.
It's just to say to people, when would you want to know about it?
Right.
Do you want to know about it now or much later?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And usually it's not later.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't tell me when I've done my work that my work isn't right. And in fact, that was how TDD originally was introduced to me. And it wasn't really as a TDD exercise. It was, I remember I was developing some code at the Financial Times. I had an incredible boss there who will have to forgive me. I cannot remember his name off the top of my head. But I had the best engineering manager because I finished my code and the usual thing of the time, which is throw it over the wall
Yeah.
and wait for testers to go tell me it was wrong. I thought it was right. It was classic worked on my machine kind of mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember doing this at the end of the day. I think it was a Thursday. And I remember my boss just turning around and going, "Are you sure it works?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't be saying it's done if I wasn't sure it works." He said, "Are you sure? If someone was to say to you that your home will be bombed if the tester comes back and says it doesn't work, do you feel you could do anything more to be confident?"
Yeah.
And I was like, he caught me. I was there till I think 7 p.m. that night because he's right. I had accepted doubts. And I accepted those doubts because the pipeline had my back, because the tester had my back. And so I learned that the contract between you as a developer and the rest of the world is to be as confident as you can possibly be that what you're creating is the right thing when you're writing it. Any feedback loop that doesn't surface at that moment to help me do the right thing is something of friction and frustration.
Mm.
And so when you look at it that way, there's an awful lot that we've incorporated into our pipelines where we could say you're battling the pipeline, just like I was battling the tester. I was in arms race with the tester at that point. And so if we put more in the pipeline, we're making the pipeline more complex, we're making it hard to maintain, but we're also then introducing this toxic relationship with the pipeline. So the first question is, can you move it out of the pipeline and move it left? Sometimes you cannot. A lot of times you can. With work, you can.
Yeah.
The other challenge is to try to implement the whole OODA loop. So a good example of this is, say in your pipeline, you surface security vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And it might even block your PR continuing. It might even block what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That is, in OODA language, that's the observe and orient covered.
Okay.
I'm very specific about the OODA loop as an entirety because does it help you make a decision?
Right.
Does it help you take some action? If it doesn't do those things, it's naturally frustrating. Now, I used to work on fast jets. I used to work on things like the Joint Strike Fighter and Eurofighter, now called the Typhoon.
Cool.
And one of the things you learn when you're creating the warnings panels and you're creating the cockpit equipment is, don't tell me if I can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
If it's not pertinent to this moment in time, don't tell me. Which is really all we're saying with developer experience and tuning this cognitive load.
Right.
So again, it's great to move left and to stop that arms race with the pipeline or arms race with production, whichever source that information is coming from. But where the real potential, I think, actually, in AI-assisted coding comes in is where you can make those OODA loops complete.
Mm.
So don't wait for me to create a PR and get a CI/CD build going before you tell me I've got to make some changes. That's not helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to like you for that. But I am going to like you if I'm in the IDE and I'm working on a class, I'm working on a function, and literally my assisted coding pair programmer or mob programming crew are turning around going, while you're there, this is going to flag something down the line.
Mm.
But he's a good candidate for your fix now. That's an experience that I've been trying to engineer with the genie, as Ken Beck tends to call it, AI-assisted coding, and go, what could be surfaced then, not just as here's a decision to make,
Yeah.
but here's an action to take. And then how do we tune it so that action is super close to what you want to hear and do at that time?
I empathize a lot with this idea of, push things as close to development time, like when you're hands-on code as you can. And I think for some of these things, it's like we can kind of run with your, I think, vulnerability or like security kind of tools here. And I think depending on what it is, as engineering teams, I think the industry standard has gotten better at the tooling, just doing this out of the box for us a little more. It's like, hey, we'll have a an NPM package scanner or whatever. You install a package, and part of the NPM install process, you have a post step that goes and does a sweep and makes sure like nothing's broken. But that feels very different than some kind of CI/CD tool. And maybe this is more what you're talking about. That's like going in and making sure, using some like pen test like suite that's like running all this automated stuff against your front end, trying to break something. I guess, is that what you're talking about? Like the second half of that being more like automated and just happening all the time while you do local dev?
Yes, I think if the pipeline's silent, you're doing things right. So if the pipeline is fixing things for you, what is really the problem that's going on? Because clearly what you've actually declared is a human in the loop is not necessary. And this is the sort of question I like to ask when I hear we're going to introduce a new phase to a pipeline because we're going to check this other thing. We're going to have a new plugin, something is going to come along. The question I ask, which sounds crazy in terms of why isn't everyone asking it, is, okay, what's the decision and action that developers going to take at that moment in time? And timing is everything.
Yeah.
In cognitive load terms, timing is absolutely everything. If we surface good information and signals from our CI/CD build, that's great, but does it actually help anyone do anything with that? Again, back to my cockpit analogy, if you like. When I was working on cockpits, one of the things I worked on was 3D audio. I didn't work on 3D audio because they were keen on listening to music and thinking that Queen was playing in front of them.
Yeah.
I was working on 3D audio because they're trying to listen to where a missile is coming from. And that would help them take maneuvers that would be more appropriate faster.
Yeah.
Classic OODA loop thinking, the OODA loop being something that came out of dogfighting initially. It's the same thing, is that when are you raising the signal? It should be the moment closest to when the person needs to make a decision and perform an action of value.
Yeah.
And when you look under that lens at all of the different signals that you're hoping your development teams get, are they getting them at a moment when the team are best tuned to do something about it sensibly and quickly?
Yeah.
And so you might find some things, raising a ticket, sticking it on a backlog, that's the right thing to do. It'll have all the information they need to do it later on. But most of those signals aren't expecting to be dealt with that way. There's signals where, for example, the SecEng team are going, we're going to raise this thing and we're going to expect you to take action soon.
Yeah.
And then they'll be shocked when I turn around and say, you've told them there's a problem, you've given them a vague reference to some docs to help them with it. Do you know what's going to happen next? And they'll say, yeah, they're going to fix it. Like, no.
Yeah.
No. It goes into a backlog somewhere and they go, maybe one day. And then they wait for you to moan as to when it needs to be done.
Yeah.
Or maybe the tooling moans.
Or they send you an email or a message or whatever.
Exactly. So nagware, by definition, is something that hasn't considered the OODA loop well enough.
Yeah.
And because we can be sloppy with people's tension and their lives, sometimes it's different when someone's in a cockpit and they've got to make decisions that will save their life immediately and everyone is aware of the consequences and the importance of those decisions.
Yeah.
But most people aren't aware of that when it comes to their development teams, even though they're some of the most expensive resources you've got that are doing incredible work and they are potentially your differentiator in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Tuning their experience is something we don't really do much of, or it seems very early doors that we're doing it.
Yeah, so what's coming to mind for me here is like in the notes from your talk here, you use this term Franken platform and the bureaucracy of the development pipeline.
Yes.
So it's hard for me not to see there being kind of like two sources of most of these steps or components maybe that are in the typical pipeline development flow. It feels like there are those that are added truly for the sake of improving productivity, like of the development team inherently. And then there's the external factors that some other concern in the organization has decided needs to be part of this process. Like security auditing for something. We're not doing that because we think a developer is more productive if they're worried about these security concerns. It's because we know it's a necessary thing to have this check in place. And it feels like that subset where it's like this isn't being done inherently for productivity at production time's sake, but there's some other concern. Like those are the ones that I think are always going to be more difficult to make a decision that optimizes on the least amount of developer pain, right? Because it's just like, no, we need this check here. Do you have this kind of dichotomy in your head? Do you approach these kinds of tools differently? Or is it the same decision-making process regardless of that source?
Do I have that dichotomy in my head? No. Do I think it exists? Yeah. No, I don't. So this is something that I think is an interesting thing in the software development industry. And it goes back to something that's a personal theme of mine, which is the metaphors we use that don't serve us.
Okay.
So the metaphor of productivity comes from the metaphor of production, which comes from the industrial age and factories. Yeah. I don't think software development is a consistent factory-based exercise. And even our terminology like pipelines and things.
Yeah, I know. We use all these terms.
We use so many terms from the factory metaphor or even the foundry metaphor. I was thinking about this earlier on today.
Right.
Foundries exist because enormous force is necessary to turn one thing into another, which is, again, if you think about it, not the best metaphor for what software development is supposed to look and feel like.
Right, yeah.
So yes, do I see this dichotomy everywhere almost? Yes. I see people going, there are security concerns that need to be considered. There are regulatory concerns that need to be considered.
Right, yeah.
There is usually a host of non-functional, and I hate that term, by the way, but non-functional things to think about, which are incredibly functional in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Are they considered non-functional because they're not on a feature list? The reason I don't carry the dichotomy in my head, or at least it's there, but I put it on the same shelf as suspicious metaphors like factory, is as a developer, my responsibility is to produce value. Productivity of software is the wrong metaphor for me. It's the wrong analogy. I know that Kelsey Hightower, I think, has been talking about this recently, saying the best code you write is the code you don't have to write at all. There's something that you can do that doesn't require more lines of code. And we all know that, right? So we've known that for many, many decades now, that source lines of code, terrible measure of productivity. And yet, isn't it really tenacious, that thought that we're trying to be productive? And it's really tenacious to boards of companies because they see we have nothing and then we have something. So surely something's being built, or if you make the building really consistent and factoryize it, then we lose any dependence on people. We can use them and we can swap them in and out. And it all feels very attractive to somebody who doesn't or has never engaged in the activity of creating any software. And I'm very careful with that. I'm not saying coder. I'm not saying designer or architect.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's a wonderful creative exercise, trying to solve a problem, trying to create something that didn't exist before, that solves something and adds value to something. But the thing I find tragic is that that's not really what we teach anyone, software development in universities particularly. I would say that the closest I've seen to understanding this and really grappling with it is Dave Farley's work on modern software engineering, because it calibrates it back to what are we here to do? We're not here to produce code. We're not here to produce anything.
Right.
We're here to enable value. And to do that, we need a disciplined approach, which is the scientific method. And my favorite explanation of the scientific method, people can check it out online. It's Richard Feynman talking about how science works. It's a brilliant video. And it starts with, I've got a guess. And you hope it's an educated guess.
Yeah.
And then you go, okay, well, I compute the consequences and I go and compare the consequences against reality.
Yeah.
And does it play out? I use falsification. I use Karl Popper's falsification. I go, yeah, is it doing what I expected, and is it doing things that go against that?
Right.
And that's all good learning. And then I go back and I change my guess. Okay. That's software engineering. And at no point have I said you code anything.
Right. Yeah.
So this is where I think that I'm hoping that over time, Dave's message is going to land. I'm doing my best in my own blog to try and continue to amplify this message. Because when I'm creating platforms to support that work.
Mm-hmm.
And more often than not, people think the platform is trying to increase flow of code or flow of function points or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's flow of value.
Yeah.
And when you know that, you go, okay, how do we judge value? We judge value when it's in someone's hands.
Yeah.
And so you've got to shorten the feedback loops to the point where someone can use a developer are taking responsibility for something that's a long way down the loop now. And so the more feedback loops we can bake into a platform that help the flow of value land well and the flow of experimental value land well, and you start to test your guesses, the better. Because the problem is, as I see it, we've built platforms and we still naturally, because of these metaphors that we bought into that are still extremely tenacious, we're still building factories. And that implies that we know exactly what we're building when we're building it, because then it's just going to go through and think it's going to be right.
Right.
But if you take Dave's approach, Dave's sort of, well, what comes across in the modern software engineering book is it's experimental. We're having to guess. We're working with complexity and complicated environments that we're dropping change into, and judging value is not trivial.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really important, I think, to calibrate. And if there's one thing we can do as an industry, I think, is realizing that the feedbacks are everything, because we are performing the scientific method when we're trying to create value. If we can let go of thinking code is the point, thinking that all of the technical nuance is the measurable stuff that matters, it's important to, when you're an experienced working with a great developer, and I can't hold my hand up there, I'm an okay developer as far as I'm concerned, but I've worked with some great ones.
Mm-hmm.
When you work with a great one, it's stunning to see how they think about software. I will go back to Rod Johnson on this simply because I've paired with him a couple of times in my life, and they've been the best experiences I've ever had,
Mm-hmm.
because he has no respect for the code beyond the fact that it should be useful and should be doing something valuable.
Yeah.
He deletes with impunity.
Mm-hmm.
He's resting heavily on TDD, on there being great tests, unit tests, integration tests, and accompanied with very fast feedback loops, and the version control, Git being the main one. He's leaning into that so hard, and he cannot accept it. It's not there, because he can't be the incredible developer and engineer that he is without it. And so when you see that, you go, oh, that's what it's all about. And everything else then goes under the lens of how do we get this person's guesses of value to be validated as quickly as possible.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting insight. So I want to keep like applying that or layer that over my question from before, where I guess when I'm talking about these two types of concerns, I guess, in like the pipeline and the, whatever, I know I'll do my best not to use these terms, these two types of priorities or sources for concern within our thing we're using to produce value. It still feels to me, even if we're not, one of them isn't specifically tuned to writing more lines of code, but like this is a thing where the source of it is the creator of value that's doing this thing. Like I'm watching a really good developer, just like they're internally motivated to have a good test suite because they know they can make changes quickly and hit run and see the feedback, versus an external team coming in and being like, hey, we have this full like front-end integration suite we want to run all the time, or we have this like big security thing we want to run all the time to make sure there's no regressions here. And I think like those still feel like if you are the value creator that's the owner of one that's self-implying this versus the organization saying, no, we want to do this just to make sure, just to double check that everything's okay. Those still feel like they need to be like handled a little bit differently, or the implicit relationship as the value creator between those two is always going to feel a little different.
It does. I found it really interesting to get in the head of a great value creator, because one of the things that's on their mind is value doesn't exist in a vacuum. It has to land well in the context and environment that it's going to land. So it's no good me writing the world's best feature if it lands and is completely
rife with security vulnerabilities.
Yeah. So a great developer is able to consider those things and integrate and collaborate as part of the value creation. And it's there where the tuning of the cognitive load is important.
Yeah.
Is because you are carrying an awareness of several things.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want the concrete signals for the experts perhaps on those things to rise at the right times, because you want to create value, but it's no good you being completely distracted from the code, your business code you're trying to write, by someone popping in and going, by the way, you've got a library somewhere else in your code base that is a bit insecure. Can you go look at that instead? No one's trying to create Clippy.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I see you're writing an application. Have you thought about your security concerns in your Docker container?
Yeah.
We're not trying to cheat that, but a great developer, I think, learns to hold an awareness and maintain a focus.
Yeah.
And so what you look to do is produce a development environment that allows that focus to shift and keep that awareness still there. It gets very cockpit-like. You know, if you look at a cockpit on a fast jet, it looks like a medley of noise, but it's not. There are things that are very carefully organized to help you focus depending on the thing you're doing.
Right.
So when you're in a dogfight, there's a thing to look at. And when you're landing, there's another thing to look at and concentrate on. And they're very carefully crafted. And it's the same as a developer. You know, your job as a developer is to deliver value into context. And if that context is surfaced badly, then you're going to see it as in conflict with what you do.
Yeah.
So we're trying to surface it in an augmenting way, what you're trying to do. So you can flip focus at the right moment to other things. And you can know that you're not trying to be surprised later on in the game. We mentioned surprise earlier. One of the things that I think it was Jürgen Höller in the Spring framework, the principle of least surprise was very forefront in every piece of code I work with there. So you're trying to not surprise people late. The worst time to tell someone their Spring application is poor is when they're trying to launch it into a container.
Yeah.
So you want to do is you want to surface to them much earlier if you can. And I remember that was one of the big reasons to have all of the plugins back in the day into Eclipse
to
help development with Spring. It wasn't that Spring itself had a problem. It was just that there were things that could be noticed and surfaced at development time that would be good to know before you got anywhere near running it. And that's the tuning that we do. So you're definitely not ignoring those things, and you're definitely not trying to, this is interesting actually, we mentioned abstractions and simplification earlier. Abstractions don't always simplify. Something is simpler if I am able to disentangle things in my head and focus on one thing with awareness of other things.
Yeah.
Rich Hickey does an amazing talk on this. He talks about simplicity and easiness, and simplicity being something you can measure and is consistent across humans, and easiness is very subjective to the human. We can tune things so that awareness is still there, and you can switch your focus to the right place to pay your attention. I do like the phrase paying attention. It's one of the most valuable resources you've got as a company that relies on software is where are people paying their attention to?
Right.
And I wish people asked that question when they introduce teams. And I don't mean teams as the groups, I mean teams as the tools. And when you introduce these incredible noise generating engines in the sake of supposed collaboration, and what they do is they arrive with an enormous amount of distraction and attention drainage. When we're looking at our platforms, these are the things we're trying to bake in, is how can we help people focus at the right moment, the right time, at the right thing, and still have an awareness of other things. Back to being a pilot. You're aware that you've got a plane, you're going to land it later, but right now you're trying to dodge a missile.
Yeah. There's a specific set of concerns at any given moment.
There is. And when you look at it that way, it's not noise and it's not badgering and it's not, you've got a system that's going to land into a regulated environment. That's a privilege, right? That's a friction and a privilege, let's be clear. But I don't even like it being characterized as a friction. It's just that value is going to be judged a certain way when it lands.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to develop and experiment and explore the value in the way that we have to in software engineering. But judging the value is going to be against the mirror of those contextual factors.
I want to close this loop a little bit on these kind of, again, like deploying software into a regulated environment. I think it's as good a phrase as any, where I think at the end of the day, most devs understand that I want a tool that helps me make sure that I'm not like introducing some security vulnerability or breaking a regulation or whatever it may be. But I guess anecdotally, time and time again, I always see that process is often seen as like this kind of nuisance, right? Like it's this annoying thing. We've got to go make this happy. It's often because those systems are so particular. There's a lot of like false positives going on. There's exceptions that need to be added to these rules. How do we ensure that the individuals that are saying that this piece needs to be in our pipeline, need this security check, this audit thing needs to be there, are actually like doing the stewardship that should be done to make it so this piece of our developer platform doesn't feel like a pain point? Like how do you organizationally propose that and ensure that a given entity is like the one stewarding their piece of the pipeline?
So the framework that I use for these is every single source of information to help a team deliver value is important. It starts from a position of importance. It's not a nuisance. It's not a nag. It's only a nuisance and nag when we try and deliver it.
Yeah, right.
So it starts with it being sources of information. to help developers make better decisions.
Yeah.
Okay. So we start from there. And then the sort of framework of questioning I bring is, do we need the feedback loop at all? Start there. A good example is a recent feedback loop around critical vulnerabilities. We want people to be fixing their critical vulnerabilities within, say, 10 days, 20 days.
Right. Yeah.
Something like that. Okay. So we could start by going, yes, we could check that at CI/CD level, and we could then graduate it into being a issue or an incident, or maybe we could alert on it. The thing is, we haven't asked the first question, which is, how did we get there in the first place?
Yeah.
Is there any way we can avoid that feedback loop at all? That's the first case. So a bit Sun Tzu at this point. We're saying, do we question whether we have to enter the battle at all?
Right. Yeah.
And by asking that question, which doesn't get asked often, but by asking that question, we start to not just shift left, we shift it off the board if we can. And then if we find, okay, no, it is at the moment in time, perhaps not able to remove from the board. Okay, we can use a guardrail to do this. We could use observability to produce such a guardrail, maybe. There are mechanisms we can do to do the O and the O part. We can observe and orient people towards these things.
Yeah.
The question I still ask at that point, which isn't obvious from the acronym or the initialization, is that when do people want to know this?
Yeah.
If you just say we need an OODA loop, or even if you just say we need an OO, then you're not even asking half the question. The important point is when. When should this be brought to people's attention? When can they prioritize it? When can they do something about it? And then you have to have that attention as a scarce resource. The scarcest resource we have is human attention. So how do we tune this now to bring the right information at the right time to the right attention of the things?
Yeah.
You notice I'm still not talking about pipelines. I'm still not talking about any of the other bits and pieces. I'm saying there's something valuable that needs to be brought to an engineer's attention. Then you craft the surfacing, the observation, the orientation, so that it at least arises in a helpful place, a non-distracted place. Back to your nuisance. You try to avoid the nuisance then.
The feeling like a nuisance. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And then the worst that, it then escalates from nuisance to flood, to overwhelm, to burnout. You know, being very, I mean, nuisance we can smile about, but burnout, no one's smiling about.
Yeah.
But what we're doing is we're then crafting it such, and we'll get it wrong. It's all experimental. It's all going to be science, but we'll craft that feedback loop and that OODA loop essentially that then brings the observation orientation to a place where the teams can find it valuable rather than a nuisance. And that's where DX can be very useful. So developer experience surveys and things like that, you can say, we've surfaced this to you.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about it? Honestly, what's it doing for you?
Right.
And then you can start to look for patterns of decision and action that you could offer them. And that often comes a little later, but it shouldn't be lost. Because if we can take the decision and action, or we can support the decision and action, then we start to have a proper OODA loop that is definitely not a nuisance now. It's turning it into valuable response.
Yeah.
And then you can start to ask some really entertaining questions like, we're back to, can we get it off the table? Do we need a human decision here?
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't. And sometimes you really do. And that's okay, but we should be asking those questions because, again, the most valuable resource we have of where value delivery is human attention. And it always has been.
Yeah. You mentioned your blog earlier. Where can people find that?
They can find that on Substack. So some time ago, I realized I had about 30 years worth of stuff I'd noticed and noted down. Some things were half completed stories. Some things were rules and recipes for how to do things. Some are incubatory ideas at best. And so what I've been doing for the last 5 years is trying to figure out if there's anything good in that compost heap of ideas.
Yeah.
And I seem to find a few that are often prompted by what I notice round and about in the industry. I have Gen AI to thank for a lot of the stuff I'm writing because it does seem to be we should go back to basics in some circumstances, which is always a lovely thing. And so, yeah, my blog is the software Enchiridion. That's the ancient Greek word for handbook. It was inspired as well because I bought a copy of the Epictetus Enchiridion from 1578.
Whoa.
And I then realized I had to learn Latin and possibly Greek to translate it. But yeah, I was reading the title, and the title of that book, just an interesting little tidbit. The title of that book, I'm going to misquote it because it's essentially in Latin. but it mentions Hugio, which is a dagger. So that was when they grabbed me first, right? It's called Epic TT Enchiridion. And then in the next part of the sentence, there's this word Pugio, and it's big on this front cover. And I was like, what the hell is that word? And it's dagger. And what it is the rest of the subtitle, if you like, is a dagger for carving out the things you could do to live an artfully great life, human life.
Yeah.
I thought the subtitle to me is even better than, it's a handbook. Literally, it's supposed to be small enough to go in the hand. Okay, great. And it's diminutive, right? So it's small handbook, Enchiridion. But the rest of it is a dagger for the art of living a human life. And I'm misquoting it, but it's there. And I just thought that's perfect. And then when I thought I'm going to start to surface these different tidbits of lessons I've learned and things we've covered today are in there as well. Yeah, I thought I'd make it the Enchiridion, the software Enchiridion over on Substack.
Nice. We'll get a link to the show notes as well for those listening. I don't know how to spell this Latin word. We'll have a link in the show notes.
It's very.
But thank you for coming on and chatting with me, Russ. It's been a pleasure. This was thought-provoking again. I feel like this was the best cup of coffee I could have had.
I'm glad I offered that coffee, and thank you for inviting me on.